Pandora's box is about to open wide.
Welcome once again to Pandora's Box. Today we've got another special guest on the show, Mr. Marc Carey. Marc Carey is someone that we work with a lot. If you're listening on AW Radio, well, if you're listening on AW Radio, you've probably heard Marc's show UYC, which plays on Saturday nights on AW Radio. But obviously Pandora's Box also goes out on Deal Radio, which is Marc's very own station. So I expect a lot of people listening will already be familiar with Marc. But just to give you a bit of background, if it is the first time listening, or if you're listening on in podcast form on Spotify or YouTube or whatever, Marc Carey runs Deal Radio over in Kent. You're also the CEO of Evolution Music, which is, what's the best way to put it, is a company that sort of specialises in making revolutionary products for the music industry. Would you say that's fairly accurate, Marc?
Well, that's not a bad guess. It's an R&D company that focuses on innovation and sustainability in the music industry. So
and
there you go. Pretty much on the button, mate. Yeah.
Well, that's all right then. Mm-hmm. And then so far as of this moment, your most successful product is Eco Vinyl, which is 100% plant-based vinyl. Previously vinyl has always been made from PVC. I think that's right, isn't it?
Yeah. So we've got Evo Vinyl, which is our first product to the market. So yeah, currently we're working on it's a 60% plant-based unit, and then everything else is sort of organic fillers and the master batching. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's the first plant-based. There's bio-attributed products out there, which basically means instead of using fossil fuels for the PVC, they'll use a plant-based or a waste oil. That's not what we do, but we deal with the bioplastic directly. So taking a plant and turning it into a compound that's usable for bioplastics.
Yeah, and I think, it's hugely relevant because I think was it last year? I remember hearing that vinyl outsold CD for the first time. It might have even been 2022. Outsold CDs for the first time, pretty much since CDs came out as a thing. So obviously vinyl's making a massive comeback. I mean, I know loads of people personally, as I'm sure everybody listening does. That's sort of got their vinyl collection and is growing their vinyl collection and is passionate about it again. But we're also living in an age where obviously everyone's eco-conscious, is worried about the environment. So with this big comeback of vinyl and it being so uneconomically friendly in its traditional form with the PVC and everything, it's not really fitting, is it? Vinyl's making this massive comeback, but it's so uneconomically friendly. Exactly. So you've obviously come up with this product just at the right time, really. That sort of is the best of both worlds. You can listen to vinyl. You can have that vinyl resurgence, but doing it in a way that's a bit more economically friendly.
Yeah, I mean, we've got to think in terms. We need to start having 21st century thinking going on, right? We've moved into 21st century. When I was a kid, I used to read, which is still around, a magazine called 2000 AD. Mm-hmm. And we used to read that magazine and think, it's going to be amazing. 2000's going to come. We're going to be in flying cars and everything. We got to 2000, not a lot changed, let's be honest. Apart from smartphones. So, in a 21st century environment, come on, we're nearly a quarter of the way into this century, and we're still dealing with environmental issues.
Well, they've actually gotten worse, really, haven't they? Since I would have been like a child in the early 90s. It's crazy. I remember my mum used to sometimes watch that Space 1999. Back when I was like a little kid, and the idea of like what they genuinely thought like life would be like in 1999 with like everybody flying around in space and everything like that. I mean, it's quite comical nowadays, but it's interesting, isn't it? Because in some ways, I think over the course of my lifetime, you can see some massive progressions in certain areas, but the eco side of things has actually seems to have gotten worse in a lot of ways. Anyway, I don't want to say in every way, because apparently I've heard that there are actually far more trees on the planet now apparently than there were, say, post World War II era, things like that. So it's not all doom and gloom, and that's not what I'm trying to say. But on the one hand, when I was growing up, you still had these massive, heavy, cube televisions. Only a few channels still when I was born. What was it? I think 4 channels when I was born. Mm. And then you've got the explosion of things like Sky TV, and then when I was like a couple of years into secondary school, sort of first, second year of secondary school, then it was like suddenly became the norm for everybody to have a phone. I mean, I think that was like a big step, quite interesting. So you can see, a lot of things, and I mean, the fact that like what phones do nowadays, they are mental, really, if you think about it, aren't they? It is sort of crazy to think that you've got like a camera, the internet, you can message anyone, you can download any app, you can play, like the things that you can do on a phone is crazy. But yeah, at the same time, what they say things like, what is it? There's like a big rubbish like heap floating around in the ocean that's bigger than the state of Texas or something crazy like that, which is a mental thought.
I mean, there's so many issues around sustainability that I think for me, it's not so much that there is a problem. It's that the problem has been there for some time and it's still not being addressed in the right way. So you've just referenced the evolution of technology. So technology has moved on. We know that it's moved on in terms of renewable technologies and clean tech as well. But we're not seeing the advent of that in the market. So there's something else at play here. And that's really, without getting on my political soapbox, that's really what we need to be considering. So as Buckminster Fuller put it, if you can't fix the system, then you need to create a new system that makes the old system defunct. And there's another famous saying from, I think it was Einstein, who said, you can't fix a problem using the same thinking that created the problem in the first place. And that's the point. We can't keep trying to fix things using the same methods we've used for the last 100 years. So we're now at the tail end, really, of our industrial revolution, because now we're moving into a technological and digital revolution. And then, we're not that far away from transitioning to wetware. And there's also things that we need to be considerate about us as humans integrating with technology. Yeah. So that would be the next phase of what's going on. Whatever we think about that, it will happen. So I think my argument would be we've managed to find the resources to finance to make technological advances in some areas, and yet these simple areas where we can fix things that are inherent to all of our evolution and our growth have not been fixed. So why? Why has that not been fixed? So if they're not going to fix it, we've just got to get on and do it ourselves. And that's what we do in evolution.
Yeah, and I think it's great as well. And I think it's really worth saying as well for anybody listening out there, because I know a lot of people that sort of suffer from existential crises nowadays, because I think, we hear a lot of doom and gloom from sort of mainstream media. It's a lot of doom and gloom and stuff. And while there are a lot of these issues, there are a lot of people out there like yourself, Marc, with your products. I remember hearing about, I think it was some Dutch inventor, some young lad, who's like come up with it. Have you heard about that? It's like this giant,
seas.
In the ocean. It's like this giant, massive, like mile-long net or something that he's made that goes powered through the ocean, and it's basically when it finds like garbage, it keeps going until it's basically circled it, and then it can be like collected and taken away. So I don't want people listening to start thinking like, oh man, Did
you see the floating bins as well that someone's put in the sea?
Yes,
that was really cool.
Have you seen them, Marc? They just go sort of just under the surface, and it
pulls everything in.
Suction. It's just simple physics, isn't it? And it sucks all of the any rubbish that's sort of sitting on the surface. It's great. So I mean, I think there are people all over the world like Marc that are doing great things for the planet. So there's we haven't lost hope yet. I think there's you've always got to cling on to that hope. It's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah, I think there's two things as well. Really interesting, Calum. Right. So one of the things that that we often see, if I may, I'll reference an analogy. Okay, so if you're interested in documentaries, I watch a lot of documentaries. Often, if a documentary is dealing with an issue that they haven't quite got all of the science on, they make a supposition in the first 5 or 10 minutes. So they might make a straightforward supposition. If I use something simple, I'm going back like 20 years when they started talking about, did dinosaurs become birds, right? So in the first 5 or 10 minutes, they make that supposition. They say, all dinosaurs became birds. And the rest of the documentary, whether it's an hour, 2 hours, whatever, is based on that supposition. So it doesn't mean that the rest of it, the 80% that you've watched is correct. It just means it's based on that first 10-minute supposition. So often when we're talking about the science and the understanding of what's going on in the environment, we base it on certain suppositions that the science community have created, or academia. So they'll say, okay, it's a carbon issue. The reality is, we've got to a point now where we could have fixed this a long time ago and we haven't. So it's not really about trying to fix anything. It's about trying to create an environment that's more sustainable that we can survive in order to move forward. So it's not doom and gloom. It's just look, the reality is the way you've been running things for X amount of years cannot continue. We can't allow it to continue. And in order to survive, we need to change to move forward. There's no doom and gloom about that. It's just
be
saying,
proactive.
And unless, of course, the industrialist that likes to keep us in the status quo.
Yeah, I think it's so important because basically what you're saying is like, be proactive. Like, we've got to be proactive as a species, as a nation, whatever you want to call it. We've got to be proactive about things. It's no good sitting around, feeling sorry for ourselves or about these things. Let's do something about it. It's up to us. We are the people that are alive right now. None of us are getting any younger. Let's get up and do something about it.
Yeah, for sure. And it's amazing the amount of things that can be done. And do you know what's great about working in the music industry is that, I spent many years, probably something like 20 years in the field of innovation, sustainable tech and renewable technology in the built environment. And that's where the two kind of minds have met in this, because I worked in the music industry as well, which I'll tell you a little bit about in a while. But what's great is the way it's been embraced. It's a very different space because you're dealing directly with consumers. There's generational concerns, and then actually in the creative arts scene, people seem to have a little bit more emotional intelligence than perhaps in the corporate sectors, where understandably it's about bottom line and profits. I get that. I'm not discounting that that's an important factor. Economics are important. So we can build, nations. We can do the things we want. But the reality is, in order to make a difference at a cultural level, you need to have those kind of creative eyes. And we've been embraced by that, and we were blown away by the response we got to this. And so there's people that are trying to sort of ride that wave, which is great. There are people out there that are doing similar things to us. It's not what we do, but it's similar, and it's a step in the right direction. But because of our background, because of our understanding and our need to make a meaningful or create a meaningful solution, maybe we're a little bit more robust. Maybe we've gone a little bit further than some other people would. Not discounting academia, of course, but as a small independent company, we've done everything we possibly can to look at the life cycle of where we are. So we're not just turning up as a one-trick pony going, oh, aren't we wonderful, we've done this, and then we'll sail off to the Bahamas on the profits of this commercial opportunity. It's the first thing we're doing. So that's, just circling back to your point, you might not think you can make a difference. You might not think the opportunity is there, but there's still a ton of things out there. There's still lots of inventions to find, right?
How did you actually first come up with the idea of Evolution Music, Marc, and actually get into it? With Evo Vinyl and everything. How did that come about?
It really stemmed from the record label.
So for people that don't know, you own Roulette Records.
Yeah, I'm a co-owner and founder of Roulette Records. Originally Roulette. Do you
want to give a little bit of background on that a minute?
Yeah. So I mean, to be fair, you've got to cycle right back to my days as a DJ.
Let's do that then. Why don't we start there? How did you get into the radio sort of scene? Was music always like a massive part of your life, like growing up?
Yeah.
What are your earliest memories of music?
My sister, parties at my house. My mum was a single parent. We lived with a very underclass family living on a council estate in South London. And it was parties.
You're from Croydon originally,
Marc? My brother and sister.
Is that right? You're from Croydon?
Yeah, Croydon, Thornton Heath, that sort of area. And then I spent a lot of my time growing up in like Peckham and Walworth Road, Elephant Castle, all around that area. So I still do love London. But yeah, I mean, we used to have great parties. My brother and sister, say 10 years older than me, so they were obviously into their music. And my sister worked originally in a record shop and then moved into working in the music industry. So I've always been around music.
What sort of stuff was your sister and your brother listening to?
Brother was listening to probably a bit of rock and roll because it was still around in the late 70s. There was still, he didn't hit into the punk scene. He was still into his rock and roll.
Can you think of any bands in particular?
Maybe a little bit of pop. Yeah, I mean, he obviously was into, at the time, there was a whole picture disc series that came out. I think it was called Cruising. And they were basically reissues of old tracks of like Chuck Berry and, bands like that. But then there was the whole rockabilly crowd that came off the back of that. So Stray Cats. And so he was playing that alongside the traditional 70s stuff that everyone was playing, Queen and Thin Lizzy. But my sister was more eclectic. And so what she used to do is when new albums would come out, or she'd just come home and go, "Oh, here you go, and give it to me." So I'd be playing. I was like, I can remember when I had my first kind of music lesson at secondary school. So what had I been at, about 11, I guess. And they sort of went around the class and said to everybody what music you're into. So you're talking early 80s. So most of the people in the room, the kids in the room, were saying whoever was top of the pops then, right? Duran or whoever it was. And then they got to me and they said, "Who do you like?" And I was like, the Flying Lizards and Ian Drury. You could see the kids were all like, who's it? What is he talking about? Yeah. And then the teacher looked at me as if to say, "You've got quite an eclectic mix there, son," So I think he took me, I remember his name, Mr. Greenhouse. I think he took me under his wing a little bit, and he used to say to me, "Oh, have you heard this track?" So very early on, music was just part of my life, man. And then once I realised, maybe because of the parties and that, I was like, I wonder if I could do a bit of DJing. And there was a strange kind of evolution of my understanding of music. And then for something, I don't know why, but the kind of hip-hop, early days of hip-hop and electro really struck a chord with me. And so, again, maybe because I used to play things that other people didn't. So I started listening to and finding and rooting through to find electro tracks from America. And then
so were you like the British version of Mark Wahlberg, Marky Mark?
I don't know Marky Wahlberg, yeah.
What was his name back in the day? Was it Mark and
the Funky
That's
Bunch.
That's it.
So yeah, well, I mean, we used to, we'd go up to Covent Garden, and like people used to do break dancing, and we were part of the graph scene. And a few of the people I used to knock about with and DJ with went on to do a bit more, like Mark Moore when he created S Express. Tim Simonon created Bomb the Bass. All bands that came out in the late 80s and early 90s. But I just stayed in DJing, and that whole scene evolved from electro, kind of then had a strange transition into house, and then a transition into trance, and then into rave. So then I was a rave DJ. So it was great that I was DJing, but I had to have a day job as well, because I'd earn good money and then just spend it. So most DJs of the 80s and 90s can attest to that we earned good money, but boy did we spend it. And we had an entourage. So my day job was kind of working in the built environment. That was where I sat. And because I've been a lifelong environmentalist, anything that I could do around environmentalism in the early days, I did. So the two things have been hand in hand. And then the DJing took me into, I did comedy for a while, where I did some stand-up.
That's so cool, mate. That's so cool that you did that.
Yeah, it was funny, man, because funny. There you go. It was, I've always loved comedy. It's in my roots. In fact, when I was at school, like everyone was doing the history project, I did the history of comedy on the big screen. So, everyone else was doing, I don't know.
So you did like stand-up comedy. So you just like have like a little routine you'd prepare and get up on stage and.
Yeah, so we did. We started out. We were part of the kind of post-alternative comedy troupe when we came out, and then we had characters, and off the back of that, we then were invited to bigger and better venues, and then we started doing TV, and we had our own series on satellite in the early days.
Wow, what was that called?
And then when Channel 4, it was just called it was Mike and Marc at the time. It was we were just called, it was a double act, Mike and Marc, and then it became Lennon.
And was that like a sketch comedy more style, like? You had characters.
Yeah.
So can you name some of the characters that were on your shows?
Yeah, there was Ace McPartland and the attractive Dennis, who was. Ace McPartland was a rather dubious magician, and the attractive Dennis was his
dubious companion. Magician. I like that.
And used to secrete things in places where you shouldn't secrete them, and then pull them out and tell you what it was. So yeah, we got booted off of a couple of shows for that. But then there was a number. There was Leslie and Leslie Phillips. So for those of you that remember the Carey On days, so it was basically two characters that had adopted Leslie Phillips' demeanours, and so it was all very surreal. And then there was there were a number of things, and then we did a thing for Channel 4 called Takeover TV, which again propelled us a little bit further. And then really the kind of double act split, because I was working, he was working, we were different pressures on us. And I kind of had enough of performing, so I started writing a bit more. That's when I got into radio, basically. So we're looking at what was happening in the industry around the comedy scene specifically, and working with television. And some of our listeners might remember this, but deregulation kind of happened where they said, right, the big terrestrial channels, because of the advent of satellite coming online, they couldn't have the lion's share of production value anymore. So it had to go out to independent production companies. So that was great news, because it meant presumably independent producers could work and make some great content. But what we found was that the people that worked in terrestrial television and satellite just set up, or artists that already worked, set up their own production companies. And then they got all the work. So we kind of said, well, you know what? Again, in this I guess circles back to what I was saying earlier about doing it yourself. We said, well, we will form our own production company and we'll just call it Up Your Chuff in a kind of up yours to the industry. And that's where UIC...
I didn't know that.
That's how it started.
That's interesting.
Yeah. That's the story of Up Your Chuff.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So did you actually start your radio show as well around that time and call it Up Your Chuff, or did that come later on?
Yes, it was 20 odd years. Well, where are we? 24 years ago now. So what happened was we developed a live show, and we'd started doing a little bit of it on the radio, and it came to the live show sort of culminated in we were at the New London Theatre in Drury Lane, so we had an event there for the live show at the Talk of London, which was a really great venue. And again, it was hard graft. There was the UIC crew of 5 members strong. We had there was a band that we worked with, and because I'd started doing a little bit of the radio, I thought, do you know what? It's much easier to translate this to a radio show. It was a bit of laziness, if I'm honest, Calum.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's like, do we put all this hard graft into doing all the live show and getting up there, or do we get in a nice cozy studio,
sit around whatever you want to wear that day,
and that's what we did. Yeah, and we could do the same characters. We used to do the same characters and little sketches and on the show in the early days. So it was like 60-40. It was comedy.
Did you find it hard though doing the comedy without the visual aspect of that? Because I think to me at least, the visual aspect is a big part of comedy. So how did you get around that?
Really through the characterizations. So creating lots of different characters that translated well. So, I remember there was a character called Cockney Geezer, which was me, basically me just being my dad. Geezer. That was a piss. So it could translate on air as a very animated, vocal character. Or the historians, there was a historian's Tarquin Quin. And
that's great. That's great.
Yeah, and he used to get compliments on his hyphen. So it's all. There's all kind of crazy stuff like that. So it was very much. You're absolutely right. What we tried to do is that caricature went into the voices and the translation on there, and it was great. It was good fun. But again, it was a crew. There was 5 of us, and timing and difficulties, and so over the years we drifted apart, and really UIC was put on hold, I guess, for 3 or 4 years. Because I was working full time elsewhere, and I wasn't really, didn't have the time for it. Until I moved to East Kent about 12 years ago, and then me and my fellow director in Evolution, Steve Charter, he did a stand-up comedy course, and he wanted to do a bit more, and he was finding again live stuff is hard.
I've heard that people that say stand-ups, where I've listened to a couple of podcasts with stand-ups, because I said I'm really passionate about comedy as well. And they say, it's very almost like intimidating, because you don't know how the crowd's going to receive you. And if you say a joke or whatever and you bomb, then it's awkward as hell. And it's just like a horrible experience, I've heard.
Yeah. Yeah, it's part and parcel of the, I was talking to some of the great, I've spoken to some of the greats, been lucky enough to interview a lot of people over the years on my show, of course. And, all of them say the same thing. You know, when they started out, they bombed, or they go to a site where they thought they were going to hit it off, and they just, and that's the beauty of, you know, you've just got to take it to the licks, really. But it's kind of how much resilience do you have to keep taking those licks? And as I say, really, my response to that was a lazy man's way out. It's I'm not going to take the licks. I'm going to take the easy way.
On radio,
you know, translate into a comedy vehicle, a radio vehicle.
Yeah, I mean, I love that though, because I mean, you know, as you know a bit, Mark, like with the radio shows I've done in the past, I don't really know why, but for me, it's almost easier and more fun to come up, almost like every show I do, I'll come up with like a new persona, like an alias. And then that alias is what I've come up almost with, like a sketch comedy. That's almost I see it. So whether it's like Eldritch Oddbod on the Dark Dale, or you know, I used to have Forest of Glebe, and I was like the Wizard Meeb, and then I talk very much like this. Oh, hello, welcome again, listeners, to the Forest of Glebe. You know, and I was like this, like trying to be this like Merlin-esque sort of wizard guy, and it was supposed to be like almost like very quaint, but almost like a little bit bizarre, but very fantastical. You know, and the Eldritch Oddbod one is more like, you know, almost like very gruesome, almost over the top, but very, but a bit like odd and weird. You know, I want people to almost imagine you're sat there in this like weird like castle, you know, with like bats flying around, that stereotypical, you know, like lightning's cracking, you're sat around and just like in this like weird suit with like tails and stuff, you know, and like maybe like a top hat and a cane, you know, and you've got this like half dead butler walking around after you. So that's how I like people to imagine it, you know. So I think that's really cool. I didn't know that you almost did that with your own radio shows to start like had all these characters. Like I said, some of the names that you were saying, like chucking out, I mean, that's so up my street, mate. I have so much appreciation for that.
Yeah, we'll have to find some of the old ones and put them out. But it's interesting you say that. But you know, the imagination is the greatest tool that we have available to us, right? So you've just hit the nail on the head there. Because if you think, I mean, maybe our listeners can reference this in their own mind. Is like if you were to listen to someone like Ken Bruce, right? If you listen to Ken Bruce on the radio, if you didn't know what he looked like, you wouldn't think that was Ken Bruce, right? If you've ever seen what Ken Bruce looks like in real life compared to his voice on the radio, you wouldn't put the two, because it's a characterization. And it's the same. So you can go on radio, you can still be Calum Waite, but you can create a myriad of characters, and suddenly they come to life in a way that they can't. You know, in order for us to, you've just said there, you know, having a creepy castle or whatever it was, you know, and like Butler walking. You know, the budget for that would be huge.
Of course,
If we were to do it in TV
so much work
or film. But on the radio, it's you in the room with a few creaky sound effects and going,
exactly. Do you know what I mean? You can create that image in people's heads. It's like different. I guess it's like, you know, like anybody can write. It's a bit like writing a book. Do you know what I mean? You can write a book and let people's imagination take care of that. Like reading the words. You know, if you're portraying what you want to portray accurately enough, whether it's through your voice or through words, people's imagination is going to take care of the rest.
Exactly.
So it's a nice cheap way of doing things.
Yeah, so that's it is, isn't it? I like that. I like the way we've come back to it. It's cheap and it's with laser. But I think just to kind of to tail off on this very long story that I'm now translating. There was a point where we started the new UIC. And we played around with the idea of some comedy characters, but more in theme. We themed it. So each year you might know this, and listeners might know that there's Talk Like a Pirate Day.
Right, all right.
So every year in September, I think it is, there's one day which is Talk Like a Pirate Day. So we decided we'd do the whole show as Talk Like a Pirate.
Right, okay.
And we'd get a guest on and we'd make them talk like a pirate.
I love that. It'd be easy for us being from Somerset, wouldn't
it? We would just try to do the whole thing and then played like a bit of pirate metal and stuff. Anyway, so that's we started doing that. But because of my love of music and grassroots music as well, I started to invite people on. And again, I think you've probably found this with the shows that you're involved with, because we give a lot of autonomy to our content creators and space and editorial control. That's actually something that people are tuned to and they like. So within a very short space of time, and I'm making assumptions here, but I can only go on what I've been told. People just really liked coming on the show, whether it be a band or an artist or an act, whatever it might be. They just loved coming on. So over the years, it's translated from this kind of weird comedy music vehicle to just a straightforward interview and platform for musicians, really, or whatever it might be. So each week we have an artist on or an act, so it's really strange, and it's moved just to me being the presenter because that was a conscious decision, because it's like, listen, how much Mr. C can you actually listen to? It's really about it's about the people that are coming on the show. So I just host it, facilitate it. So it's evolved over those years. But my heart is still.
It's funny, Mark, because I'm seeing you talking. There's a lot of parallels. Is almost like with this show, Pandora's Box. So obviously it started, and it was more just it used to be, I'd say probably in general more comedic, and would just be more like me and Drew and young Bullwinkle just having a chat about whatever that week, and that could be, and we always try to keep it quite interesting because I've got all sorts of different interests, as do the other lads. But it could be we'd go down a right rabbit hole of talking about dinosaurs, and then maybe a little bit of current events. We could talk about freaking the pyramids, or it could be whatever. It could just be talking about how amazing sperm whales are or something. It could be so. But we'd roll from these conversations to conversations. Some of them, maybe touch a little bit on supernatural stuff, but just really whatever you could possibly think of, we would talk about it. And then obviously we sort of would have the odd guest at first, just where I'd hear somebody had said oh yeah, could we come on the show maybe to talk about this thing we're doing, and they'd be like, yeah, of course. And then I think as well, and there's nothing wrong with this, and I think that's maybe something that sometimes listeners maybe can't appreciate, but I'm sure they'll understand, when we verbalise it. I think with Drew and Bullwinkle, we did over 100 shows, just us guys having basically a chat and a laugh. And it gets to the point where I think as you're the one that's responsible for almost the content, the worst thing to feel is you're rehashing the same old thing, or maybe that the feeling the well is running dry a little bit, and even if people maybe their favorite episodes ever were the ones maybe from the early days, but it's but we can't do that anymore. That, that was then. If I just try and recreate that, it's not going to work, because I'm just sort of trying to copy something. We've sort of, the well has run dry a little bit. Maybe one day we'll be able to do it again, but I really enjoyed then suddenly having more guests on and picking their brains and hearing their stories, all these different interesting people where you can sit down with them, two human beings, pick their brains, hear their stories, and that. I love that, And as I said, I've got an almost this is my show now, where it's when I started Pandora's Box, I used to call myself Obadiah Pennywhistle. Now I just sort of do refer to myself more as Calum, just because apart from anything else, I don't want to be a lot of these guests I have on. Obviously we know each other, but a lot of people I haven't spoke to them until they're coming on the show, and I just want I think mainly I don't want it to be a confusing experience for them, not too much anyway. Right, yeah. So you want things to be fairly sort of straightforward. So this is the show for me where I suppose am most like I am in real life. But I was going to ask you, Marc, Marc, as well. And I don't know if this is the same for you. Was there an element with you, in real life, I'm a very private guy. So I like my privacy. I sort of living out in the sticks with my missus and my kid, and sort of doing my own thing. Going for hikes and in the middle of nowhere and stuff. Is there an element of you for you? Whereas I know with me coming up with characters, it's a way for me to almost allow myself to have my privacy and my private life, and then still sort of be wacky and be out there in more of a public forum. But did you find the same thing?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things you said there, and that's a very good question. You just mentioned, I just quickly want to just reference what you said there, because you were talking about really the evolution. Sorry to keep using this phrase, but it's true. The evolution of your show, and it's almost like I'm dropping trades, but
cool, come on.
No, there's an evolution of your show. Yeah, but what you got to remember is that your audience is changing.
That's it.
And I think we experienced some of that. So I will answer your question in a second, but I just wanted to reference this because in the early days, we had a certain audience that really liked what we did, but the audience wasn't growing. So when we started to change, the audience started to grow because they'd be attracted because of that specific guest. And even though you might get a few of those going, oh, it's not like it used to be. It's it's not like it used to be, but we used to have 20 listeners and now we got 20,000.
Yeah, sure.
You know, so I get that. Your show has evolved and your audience has evolved with you. So, that's how we get a more sophisticated kind of media output, right? But in answer to your question, I mean, two very important things. And again, not to get on my soapbox, but one of the reasons that we first started using comedy was because, as a member of the early Green Party, and and that was an odd time, because let's not forget David Icke was the leader of the Green Party when I first joined. So.
Yeah. Mate, I didn't know that he was the leader of the Green Party.
One to sell.
Was he already into his draconian overlords then, or was that later?
I don't know.
He was dipping his toe in.
It was certainly, what did it for me was that we all had to wear blue shell suits. And
did you actually?
Shell suits are the best of times.
Is that a real thing?
Yeah, that's a real thing. But he wrote some really great books.
Interesting guy
as well, called which I would.
He's an interesting guy.
Yeah, I mean, fascinating.
I've looked into. I watched a documentary on him, and I really looked into all of his like theories and everything. I went down a right rabbit hole, sort of when I was a teenager, and I really did. And I remember I watched this really fascinating documentary on the guy, and as I said, I really looked into the whole thing, and it's wacky to say the least, but very interesting. I think, if apart from anything else, whether you think the guy is away with the pixies or not, if you're sort of almost like a fan of fiction and fantasy, I think just almost from a story point of view, whether you want to entertain what he's saying might have an element of truth or not, it's just an interesting story. I remember I was reading all his ideas about the draconian aliens, like these reptilian alien overlords that have come to the earth, and certain royal family members and like American presidents have been them secretly. And
the bloodlines.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, right.
I've seen him live twice.
There you go.
Have you? Yeah, I mean, so in those early days, in those early days, it was like, okay, if we've got something we want to say, and we've been waving the green flag for a while, and we weren't really being heard, and then the way that at that time, I'm going to use the phrase leader because there's no other phrase for it, but the people that were out in the front were being ridiculed. So it was like, okay, laughter is a good medicine. So actually, we created a lot of characters and a lot of narratives in comedy to get our point across. So it was a secretive way of us getting our point across, and a lot of comedians do that.
It's very clever, really.
Of course, in fiction, Well, it's kind of it was like we'd say, I don't know, if somebody said to us, we could just be having a normal interview. I remember an interview we did, and they said, "Well, what's your ambition?" And I think Mike said. I can't remember what he said, but let's say he just said, we want to make people laugh. And I said, our ambition is to redefine the parameters of faith while addressing the theological inconsistencies of Western fanaticism. You could see the interview, and it said, and we want to lose our virginity. Just like at the end of it. So it was kind of like, we did that in the early days. But now I think you're right. I've got a bit longer in the tooth and a bit older, and it's like, I can be those characters, and I can let off steam. And obviously, people know me in the business environment, and then they'll listen to my radio show and say, "What's that? Who is that person? Who's this Mr. C character?" And it's like, well, that's the point. It's a character. Right, I'll turn up as I'm sure you do. You turn up ready for your show. You might have had a crap day. It might have been busy, but you turn up and you start it, and then you just bang, straight away. You just go into character, and you're in it for 2 hours.
You've got to, haven't you?
So you've got to, but it is a release, and then we can also get away with a little bit more. I think, it's not me saying it. It's Mr. C saying it.
I know what you mean. Yeah. It's a good way of looking at it. Yeah. I have to say, Marc, because
I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, I have to say, just while you're talking about that, and I think it's very hard for people that have never sort of dipped their toe in this industry at all. Maybe don't realise how hard it can be at certain times. Although it's like really fun, don't get me wrong, but I do think it is like a skill, like anything else. I remember both me and Andrew have thought, like, when we've been over in Kent, and obviously we've been on your show doing some folk stuff as the Mystic Bards of Solitude. Drew's done some Drew Bag stuff, and we've also just been over there as like a fly on the wall, witnessing who was that chap you had, Marc?
Steve Salvari, I believe. It was Steve Salvari.
What band did he used to be in again? He used to be in some big bands back in the day, didn't he?
A load of old, early jazz bands.
Yeah. Anyway, that was great.
I can't remember the name of the band.
Very impressive watching you live record a radio show. And it comes across as like very professional.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Very professional. As I said, it's
like I said, I'm good at hiding.
yeah. But it's just like it's hard to explain even like in words. But it's just when you watch you do a radio show, it's like the moment your show starts, you see that flick, that switch is flicked, and then until the end of your show, you are Mr. C, and it's very animated, and you're very it's very animated, very natural. It comes across as like very natural. And I think it's like with it can be like a little bit of a struggle sometimes. As you said, you're having to. Whether you're having a bad day or whatever's going on, you're having to come in and, try and provide like a good, like a good show or something. There is an art to it.
Yeah.
Marc had a few issues with his mic, but I think we're back in action now, so we'll pick up where we left off. So we were just talking about basically how there's a bit of an art to radio, but yeah, we were just having a bit of a joke then while that song was playing, which was Wu Can by the band Black Mountain, by the way, great song. But we were talking about, it's not just the art of actually presenting yourself, but then there's the technical issues that go hand in hand with it, which sometimes throws a spanner in the works.
Literally, you're trying to do a live show and there's technical things going off and you're still going, hey, that's great, and what about that? And you're just like, there's smoke coming out from one corner of the room.
Yeah, I remember
everything's brilliant.
I remember when me and Drew were playing.
Something happened, didn't it? One of the guitars stopped working.
I remember your producer Tony. You remember you could see him. He started flapping because we were playing a song, and I was trying to ignore it because I didn't want to start getting distracted from what I was doing because I wanted to be into the song. But I could see him sort of flapping and twisting knobs and stuff like that, and I was thinking, all right, I have no idea how this is sounding to Marc's listeners, but we'll just cross our fingers and hope for the best, I guess.
Yeah, I love the fact as well now, of course, that we got the listen back service for most shows, because what's great about that is everybody that listens back thinks every show is perfect. It's like all the stuff's edited out, all the crap's
the
gone.
Joy of editing.
But so I think, it's interesting that I was just going to say, just to kind of bring the two areas together around the sustainability and radio presenting. One of the things I think that's helped me is that as you become a radio presenter or a producer, whatever it might be, you start to become. You start to become. He says, stumbling. You start to become slightly better in conversation, right? And so being able to translate the details around the work that we do elsewhere actually has come quite easy to me, because I know I've worked with academia in the past and they'll talk to you about the work they're doing, and you sit there and you just like within 20 minutes you're asleep because you think, well, I don't know what they're talking about, it doesn't make sense, it doesn't resonate with me. So part of that experience actually has played now into my business world, where I'm able to communicate and explain things in a very I'll use the phrase friendly, but in inverted commas, friendly way or accessible way. So that's also, ironically, without even trying to, that's fed into my abilities and skills in the business.
I guess it's being like personable is the word, isn't it? People, the personable. It's like, the ability to just chat to people on a level. Yeah, because and I know that I've been to so many business seminars and I've been to events and you hear we invented actually in the early days of Aspen Waite South East, we invented something we called Lingo Bingo, which myself and the team would go to events. Oh no, the dreaded mic issue.
Yeah, it's gone one space again.
You just sound like, it sounds like there's like you've gone like turned into like the fly Marc. It's like really quiet and you're like, hello, can you hear me? maybe that's one of Marc's new comedy characters he's coming up with. The fly.
The buzzy bee.
The fly Marc.
Fly on the wall.
Yeah. Right, we'll just
lost you completely now, man.
Yeah. I say, well, Marc's just having a couple of issues. Like, you're back, mate. You're back. Nice.
Yeah. Oh, blimey. Okay, might be this desk doesn't like whatever's going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Yeah, so I was just doing a character there.
Yeah.
Like my flying person.
So, that's all right.
Yeah, personable and lingo bingo. That's what I was talking about. So the idea, we'd go in there and we'd have between the team, we'd have certain words that we know would come up because it's that business lingo, and then we kind of secretly tick off the boxes.
You should just shout bingo when that happens. Bingo!
It is funny, isn't it? I do know what you mean. It's like how someone you change almost when you go into a meeting, and then there's there is this like weird lingo, and it's like you don't normally talk like that, but then it's like I guess it's like everyone feels that they have to be playing the role, don't they?
There's certain phrases as well. I don't know if you there's certain phrases that pop up, particularly in the field of sustainability. There'll be certain phrases that people use consistently, and you're just waiting for it. And there was one as well where it was, particularly because we're collaborators, the phrase synergy. People would say
synergistic.
There's synergy here. I'd be like, there it is. Like, tick the lingo bingo box. Not there's anything.
No, not at all.
Like they use the phrase synergy. Of course, it's fine, but
it's almost like a buzzword.
It's interesting. So. Yeah, it's but also, again, what I'm trying to say there is, we're talking about ourselves going on the radio and, creating different characters. Let's be honest. In business, it's not that much different, right? Most people get up in the morning, generally successful people that are in business, get up and they have a character they play, and then they go in, however that works for them or for their environment. That's typically what goes on. They don't go home in the evening and go, sit down. Well, hopefully not. Sit down at the table and say, "What time's dinner, my dear?"
I know one or two. People like that, but I don't think they're the most popular people in their personal lives.
I'll be there.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to sort of we get to do the fun stuff, which is definitely going on the radio. And again, we were talking about this earlier, but the listenership is so important, and I remember in the early days somebody once said to me, look, somebody that was a producer said that the audience needs to feel like they're in the room with you or you're in the room with them, which depending on which character you're playing could be quite scary. But the idea that they're part of the conversation is important, so referencing them regularly and bringing them into it. And that's how all the best kind of and most successful, I think, radio presenters work. And that's what, thankfully, we've got in amongst our team here and the work we do together, which is why we share, radio shows.
Yeah, 100%, man. 100%. So how did you get into starting a record label, Marc? How did you get into starting Roulette?
So that's the UIC connection. So we started to see so many great acts coming through. And I'd see an act come into the show, and then 6 months later they'd come back, and I say, "Oh, what are you doing?" And they'd still be doing the same pubs and clubs. And so I just thought there must be something we can do to help these artists. And that's how it started really. So 2 or 3 different artists, and we said, "Can we help promote you? Can we do so?" And then we bit it off and said, "Let's form a little independent record label, but let's try and do it in a different way." So because of our ethical background, we said, well, let's adopt like permaculture principles, which is earth care, people care, fair share. It's a very simple, ethical viewpoint to stand by. And that's what we did. We said, well, create fair share opportunity for artists.
Fly markers returned a minute. So there we go.
Okay, that's right. I have to keep pulling
Yeah,
them up.
that's right, mate.
We have to, can we create a fair share opportunity for the artists? Can we put, them as people before the product? And can we do as little or no harm to the planet as possible in the process? That's where Roulette Records came from. So it's that's why I had to tell the story of UIC.
No, yeah, of course.
It came from
there. So for any bands listening out there, how can they, if anybody bands are listening and they are interested in Roulette Records and they want to get hold of you, how do they do that? And is there anything that you almost want to say to them, like a message for Roulette Records? I mean, I know you sort of did touched on that then with your sort of ethos and that, but
yeah, they can go to rouletterecords.co.uk to find out a bit more about us. But we're just about to launch a new initiative, which we're working with your team as well, which we're excited about, called NXT. And again, this is kind of simplifying the process of label services for artists, because we've worked with a number of artists that independently, where we've just literally supported them from a peripheral perspective, and they're making waves now. So you don't need to go down the traditional route. I think there's there's been models. There's been too much language around this idea of, I've been signed to a label. Actually, I've got to be careful what I say here, but traditionally, the label artist relationship has not always been the most productive for the artist.
You hear story after story, don't you?
So it can't be that. You see what I mean? So we're trying to develop relationships where we're working with the artist more in a supportive role. So if you're out there and you think, look, you need a bit more label service support in some way, shape or form. Maybe it's about you don't know how to go about getting your first album distributed, or getting a tour, or getting onto a tour with another band, or those are the kind of things that we're hoping to push through NXT in a very simple way. If you imagine you've got the likes of CD Baby and Bandcamp that are all there, which is fantastic. Bandcamp in particular, to support artists to get their music out there. But that's not just one part of this. If you want to be a really successful artist, you've got to get your following. You've got to get out and about. You've got to have your media, have your merch, and there are shortcuts. So working with people in the industry is useful, and that's what we can do. But not in a traditional way. I mean, we're even at this point. I've been talking to some other label owners, and we're talking about even the language of, the idea of signing somebody, or us being a label. What that means is we're labeling somebody else's creative arts. They're signing away their access to their creativity. It's maybe.
I think in this day and age as well, I think it's almost, for some artists, it's like a bit of a red flag. It's a bit scary. You hear, the amount of artists you hear about getting in decades-long legal battles with their former, record label, or they only made like 1% of the
royalties,
the royalties, the money made from albums and stuff. And you just think that's crazy. You think think of these artists that are like well known. Some of them, some of them are like massive artists, and you think that they're probably in this like massive mansion somewhere. And then you hear, no, they're not. They're living like a fairly a relatively modest lifestyle. Compared to their success, it's just the people, the record label that they're the ones that are sitting in the massive mansions, living it nice and easy.
It seemed like before that almost was the only way in, wasn't it? With as an artist, it was the only way to kind of get big. But now it's like people, you could be in the middle of Brazil and have a camera and put your guitar playing on YouTube, and it's like insane, and just that in itself, getting out there to people will help you create a brand and get bigger and stuff. So it's almost you can do things more grassrootsy and still touch a lot of people. I think
that is one of the best things about technology. Isn't it?
No, without a doubt. Yeah, I think that the other thing to consider is, and I know we won't get into the argument about streaming services, but that's got to change at some point. And
you hardly get anything for streams.
If you think,
I don't think. I know there's a lot of controversy with Spotify, isn't there? I can't remember how much artists get on Spotify, but it's like little to nothing, isn't it?
It's 0.0006 pence per stream.
Yeah.
It's hilarious.
And again, please don't quote me on this. If Spotify, if you're listening, feel free to come and talk to me directly. But don't hold me to this. Our experience with let me be more general. Our experience with streaming services as a record label for our artists is that there are certain assumptions made that we just have to adhere to because we've got no way of evidencing it. So if they say we only pay you if somebody streams your track for more than 30 seconds, it's up to us to somehow prove that somebody listened to it for more than 30 seconds, which is difficult. So rather than them having to prove it to us or us having to prove it to them, they say, well, what we'll do is we'll just pay you 50% of the fee because some will listen to longer and some will listen to less, and we'll just give you 50% of every stream that you get. So it needs fixing. It needs fixing big time. And I think ownership of your own routes to media, it's okay to use platforms, but finding your own routes to get your media out there in a number of different ways, including now, of course, reverting back to what we were talking about earlier, physical media. Yeah. It
is very strange, isn't it, when you think about something like a streaming platform like Spotify, and I don't want to sound like a hypocrite because, I have Spotify and I pay for my subscription and I listen to it every single day. But it's very strange when you have something like Spotify, which is, all the money from these subscriptions is going to them, but they would have a non-existent business if it wasn't for all of the art, the work from the artists that's on there. They would just that's what their entire company is. It's just playing stuff from other people. Yeah. So it's very strange if you think about it, isn't it? Like,
pretty clever. Yeah. It's a pretty clever model. But I think they're being held to account now by the industry. Yeah. There's a part of the industry. Well, ironically, and again, I know I'm speaking out of turn here, but I feel like I can. The reason that the industry is addressing that issue on behalf of artists is because, as we find out as a label, their revenues are reduced as well. If it was just affecting the artist, then you might find that it's maybe the industry wasn't picking up the gauntlet for them. But because the
labels aren't getting paid as much either.
Yeah, exactly. So now they're going, oh, we want our money. Well, yeah, okay, we'll do something about it. So, listen, the politics aside, it needs fixing.
It's an outdated model, isn't it?
And yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing, when you look at some of the artists we work with, like Ren, who just, everything they did, the guys at Jigsaw and Connor, his manager, that supported him, and the whole network of musicians that Ren worked with back in the day. They did that from their own perspective with their own fan base. They got out there, they put the records out. It got picked up on mainly on kind of YouTube videos. People did a lot of reaction videos to Ren's early stuff. But that's a prime example of how an independent artist can really make a difference. And now we've seen Chinchilla, of course, another artist that we work with, who's doing really well. I mean, she's getting 2 million views a month on Spotify. But she's built that up herself with her own.
Yeah, it's mad.
With her own entourage, if you like, and her own fan base. So that kind of shows the power of the fan and the artist working together. And then you can start to, even though it still needs fixing, you can at least start to exploit it in the way that you get a return.
I think it was good what you mentioned as well, Mark, about Bandcamp. Like that, just if there is any artists out there that aren't on Bandcamp and kind of taking control of their own selling of their music themselves, I mean, you still pay a bit of a fee on there, like whenever someone buys it, but they pay out every day. So if someone buys your album, like the next day, they pay you out for that, which is really helpful because the way it happens with streaming and Apple and all of that kind of stuff, it's not as simple as that, like, So
what I've seen some artists do, which I think is quite clever, and Angela Autumn did it, who was one of the guests we've had on Pandora's Box, who's an awesome artist, born in Pennsylvania, I think, now lives in Nashville, Tennessee. She releases things on Bandcamp initially, and then about 2 or 3 months after that, then uploads things to streaming.
That's a good idea.
But the thing is, it works because her last album, My Blank Pages, I was already hooked on her music. So when she, released her album, My Blank Pages, like last year, I think it was, I wanted to listen to it so bad. There was no way. She made sure there was no way of listening to it unless you bought it on Bandcamp. So what did I do?
Bought it on Bandcamp.
Exactly. I went and I paid my £12.99 or whatever it was. It's not like it was cost me an arm and a leg. And then it downloaded instantly to my phone, so I could listen to it in the car, wherever I wanted to listen to it. I can listen to it. I could send it as a file to my computer or email, whatever. I had it. And then 3 months after that, then she did it. So I think that's a clever way to do it.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, for sure. So that's the thing. It's artists and creative artists taking control of their own assets. That's a really important thing. And, maybe we'll see that in, as soon as we got a foot in both camps, talking about business and music and the music business, 3 camps, as it were. We see disruptors in business.
Oh, that's my old man's favourite word, isn't it? Being a disruptor. Disruptive pull.
Yeah. I think there's a kind of there's a breed of new business people coming through, and I think there's probably a generational thing. So I think we can be disruptors in some ways, but I don't think it'll be as impactful as some of those kind of Gen Z disruptors that are really going to change models completely. Yeah. So I think what's happening in the creative sector, maybe there's ways for that to be translated into other industry parts of industries, sectors. In general, But the other thing is, of course, if you look at kind of social change, typically it comes from that cultural space. And let's face it, we've seen around the world, you see cities transformed because they have a great creative arts or music scene.
For sure.
So that's what's really important. And again, not to get onto my soapbox too much, but I thought it was hilarious when we had the whole lockdown scenario. And then the creative arts weren't really supported particularly well. Yeah. Again, I won't go into that too much, but the campaign, we saw this campaign that came out from the government about retraining people that were in, and it was ridiculous. It was like, oh, you used to be a ballerina. Maybe you could be a bricklayer. You know, I mean, it was literally...
That's like a comedy sketch in itself, isn't it?
You know, right? It is. Tired of singing?
Come conform.
It is very strange how underappreciated the arts are in terms of, like, everybody wants them. Like, everybody wants to enjoy them at the end of the night when they get home from work and they want to listen to bands or watch comedians or watch television programs, whatever it may be. Everybody wants them. Almost exclusively, like 99.9. You might have the odd weirdo that says, "I don't like music. I don't want," or like just, and like some people don't watch TV, but it's the exception, isn't it? It's the exception. But so it's very strange how it is something that is so in demand yet at the same time underappreciated.
Yeah, and again, it's because it's a specific, I guess, a very specific area, and of course, creative artists are creative thinkers, and if we were being conspiratorial, governments don't like creative thinkers.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting way. It's an interesting way of looking at it. I've never really thought about it like that before. But it is strange, isn't it? Because you think, I mean, I remember always like hearing, like back in school and stuff, people would always say, if you're stuck on thinking a good way to make a living, like become a plumber, because everybody needs a plumber from time to time. It's you don't have to be the most academic person in the world. You can make an awesome living being a plumber. It's something that someone always needs, but that is true, but the arts are just in demand as being a plumber. So why? But you could make a freaking awesome, have an awesome career as a plumber, make all sorts of money. But then you could struggle. You could be an awesome musician or something similar, comedian. And you'd be struggling your whole entire life. Yeah,
they don't have this is the point. It's almost like the creative arts, and again, hopefully this is changing now. But it's almost because the creative arts have that kind of exclusivity, and like Drew was saying earlier, labels, it seemed to be the way through. It's almost like it was an exclusive club, whereas the trades, always have a trade to fall back on. Right? Any youngsters out there listening in now, do yourself a favour, learn some sort of trade, and you'll always have something to fall back on no matter what goes wrong, right? However, if you're passionate about music or arts or whatever it might be, go for it. Try and do it independently, but don't play to all the old models. But I do think in the past it's been that exclusive gang of like, if you want to be an artist, or if you want to be an actor, or if you want to be a musician, then in some way you have to adhere to the policies of getting in the door in the first place. And then once you're in the door, you've got to act a certain way and do things in a certain way and uphold the rules of the club. Now, I'm paraphrasing in a sense here and making fun of this and being facetious, but that's the reality really of what's going on. And what I love, you mentioned earlier, I think, Calum, when we were talking about people that have kind of failed in around the music industry. When they come out the other side of it, when they've realised that they only earn 1%, Bros were the prime example of that. Bros earned millions, and there's this famous conversation where they went into the end of with their tax accountant, and they said, "Okay, how much did we earn?" And they said, "Oh, you earned like I don't know what it was, 5 million, something." Amazing. Okay, yeah. And so what have we got left? And it's like you got about 30 quid because all of the expenses of everything that's done came out of their profit, came out of their revenues rather. And they didn't have an understanding of that at all. So what's happened is we're now starting to hear from people that went through that process. Brian Harvey from E17 is a classic example. He's a bit mad. He's a great guy, and he just talks about basically the crap that he had to endure to be part of that band and to be in the club. Yeah. It's to be part of that club. And there's a number, and Corey Feldman famously came out and talked about some of the terrible things he went through. in the film industry, you know. So, and I know they're the extreme ends of the scale, but it's
you hear horror stories with that Amanda Bynes. You know, I've never watched anything with her in, but I think she was like one of the Disney girls sort of from back in the day, and it's like some of them are horror stories, mate. Yeah. You know, about some of her experiences with some of the executives and stuff, or maybe it was Nickelodeon, not Disney, because I don't want to throw, you know, yet again, a bit like Marc with Spotify, don't sue me, anyone. Yeah.
Mind you, if Disney are listening, sponsorship. But I mean, again, we're sort of playing around this, but the idea is, I still think there is an element of that in the music industry, a bit of kind of top brass club. You know, if you want to get in here, you've got to play the game. Well, do you know what? Maybe we won't play the game. And you know what? Maybe we'll find new systems. And you know what? Maybe we'll do it ourselves. And you know what? Maybe we'll be successful.
Yeah, 100%.
And you know, that's the thing to hold in your heart, really.
100%, mate. So, you know, you said obviously touched on earlier about when you first moved to Deal. When did you set up Deal Radio? And what was the idea behind that? Did you literally just think one day, do you know what? I'm going to set up my radio station called Deal Radio. There's not really a market for it here. Or sorry, there is a market for it here, but it's not being... What was the idea behind that?
Yeah, again, it was laziness, mate.
Yeah?
It was just laziness. It was like, I want to be able to do things with my radio show that I can't do on the platforms they're on at the minute. So I'll just set up my own platform.
What limitations out of interest did you find on your old ones?
Editorial control.
Really?
You know, the requirement for, you know, spacing for advertisements or playlists, depending on what platform I was on. Because although UIC has existed like 20 odd years, I've also had a number of other shows on other established platforms, different shows, Rock and Roll Roots, for example. There's about 4 or 5 different rock shows that I've presented over the years for different platforms. So yeah, it was really, although UIC was on a fairly stable platform in the early days, I just thought, you know, I want to not just for me, but to offer other presenters and producers the autonomy and give them editorial control to create the kind of content that they really want to put out there, and to see what would happen. You know, I'm a bit of an explorer, and I'm like, okay, well, look, which is why I should never have had kids, because I'm the sort of guy that goes, yeah, give them that big sharp thing and that plasticine and see what happens.
Sure. I think there's an element of that. I think that's good, though. I think there's an element of that which is actually very good, which is a bit lost nowadays. But I think without suddenly sort of veering the conversation in a radically different path, I think, you know, you've got to let kids make mistakes and also realise that they're not made of glass. You know, I think the people I know that grew up that were most sort of mollycoddled and like, oh no, don't do that, love, don't do that, that's too dangerous. They're the ones that suffer from anxiety, you know, having existential crises all the time. We were talking about earlier on about that, you know, and the people like as you can probably imagine, Marc, with an old man like mine, right? There was no like, oh son, don't be careful, don't do that. You know, it was like being thrown to the wolves, everything, mate. So it's like, but I can genuinely say, like, nothing really like phases me that much. Like, I don't have any like irrational fears, or maybe, you know, or anything like that. I don't have any phobias. I don't have existential crises. I'm not an anxious person. You know, nothing like that bothers me. I know some people, and you know, I've talked to some people, and they say like, you know, certain things keep them up at night and they can't sleep at night because of this, you know, the idea of, you know, they thought they're going to die one day or something like that. I'm like, who cares? Yeah. Like, you know, like,
It's not even getting to that one, man. And that's like, you know, it's the whole kind of the idea that we exist forever. I mean, you know, we could have a whole story, a whole other show on that. But I think, I guess that element of with the radio show, it's like, look, here's the space. Oh, I've never done it, or somebody that said, oh, I know people that have amazing knowledge of music, and I'd say, you should do a radio show, man. You know, I couldn't do a radio show. Well, I wouldn't know how to do it. Well, I'll tell you what, I've now got this. I'm going back to the, you know, I'm going through the phases of the early days of DR. Well, I'm setting up this little radio station. There ain't got many listeners right now. You know, learn on the job, see what you think. And some of those shows that still exist now, 7 or 8 years down the line, you know, have won awards, become, you know, top 10 I think Neil Vesey, who we share that show, the Folk Bar. It's one of the top 10 folk shows, if not top 5 shows in the country.
Great show.
Possibly in Europe now for and in the scene. He had no experience, Vesey, in the early days, and originally he did a show called Dad Radio. Because it was basically, well, I don't know what to call it, Mark. It'd just be me playing dad music. And I said, all right, well, just do it then. Mm-hmm. And here he is now, down the line, a seasoned professional and 2 really great shows under his belt, award-winning radio presenter. And that wouldn't have happened. The other thing is, there was a wonderful lady by the name of Ronnie, and she was part of the original UIC crew on Deal Radio. So she was a bit like Steve Wright used to have the old woman. Do you remember that? Well, no, Ronnie was our sort of old woman. And it was, he had a character. He used to have a character on it. But she was a lady of a certain age, but she was quite outspoken, and she was just brilliant, and she had great knowledge. And we convinced her from the UIC, I said, you're so good on it, you should do your show. So she started doing a show for us. And then she won, this is hilarious, she was in her 70s, and she won Best Newcomer Award in the Radio Awards for a show. You got like this 75-year-old woman winning Best Newcomer.
Brilliant.
That wouldn't have happened if we hadn't just taken a chance and created this
how nice for her as well.
And she loved it. She doesn't do it anymore because she's of a certain age now where she just can't. Sure. She just can't afford the time and effort to it. But she loved it. Yeah. She loved it at times. She still supports us. But I think that was the beauty of it. It really was about, look, I can't be bothered to adhere to everybody else's constraints.
Fair enough.
And I think the only way that we can evolve and develop what we're doing is to find, a way to remove editorial control and give people autonomy. And we had a lot of, in those early years, we had a lot of hiccups and a lot of shows that weren't fit for purpose and presenters that didn't last, but at least they had a go, So that was it, really. We set up from that perspective. And then just really what happened was that even though we're based down here in East Kent, because we're an internet radio station, and a bit like we were talking about earlier, how your audience becomes more sophisticated, people were tuning into different shows from different places around the world, and now it's a global audience, So we find it hilarious that we've established ourselves on the high street down there with the HQ brand, and people come in now and they say, "Oh, I didn't know Deal had a radio station. We've been here 7 years, There's more people in Mississippi that listen to Deal Radio than there are in Deal.
It's very funny, isn't it? Yeah, it's crazy.
So, it's just one of those things. But again, and that's coming back to what we were talking about earlier. If you're an independent artist, I mean, the nature of the internet, the nature of platforms, the nature of social media, you can reach a broader audience. And if you've got something to say or you've got something to do in a quirky, unusual, professional, or even unprofessional in some cases, you can reach the audience now. Whereas even 10 years ago, we probably couldn't in the way we do
100%. 100%. All right, Mark. Just trying to think, is there anything we haven't sort of touched on or anything more you want to talk about, mate? I guess like Evolution Music. Let's get back to Evolution Music a little bit.
Yeah, because
obviously do you want to
know a little bit more about what we're doing with Evo?
Yeah, because obviously we sort of touched on that obviously right at the beginning of the show, and we were talking about Evo vinyl and stuff. So you might have touched on this a little bit already. So apologies if you already have, and I've forgotten. How did when did that start? When did Evolution Music start? How did that start? And what other products do you have in the pipeline other than the vinyl? And maybe also get into a little bit more about, because I know that you've been all over the place, haven't you? You've been flying to Iceland and the Netherlands and all sorts, having meetings about stuff. So yeah, really sort of like let everybody know what's happening with that, because it's blowing up, isn't it? It's like a massively hot topic right now in the music industry.
Yeah. I mean, we're very well established in the upper echelons. I talked about that club. We're part of the club now. Which is ironic. So even if we're the naughty schoolboy in the corner, we're still in there.
Best place to be.
So. Yeah, we're the ones that get told off by the headmaster all the time. What do you do with that? Right, but basically, again, it's this ongoing narrative. We can trace the roots of evolution back to UIC, because without UIC, there's no Roulette Records. Without Roulette Records, there's no Evolution Music. So within Roulette Records, I talked about this ethos that we held: Earth Care, People Care, Fair Shares. We were able to do the fair shares and the people care piece, but we were really struggling with the earth care piece because, physical media, CD, vinyl, merchandise, traveling, touring, streaming services. Pretty much everywhere we looked, we had an effect on the planet. So we initially, I always say that we naively looked into the market to see if we could find something that was more, more sustainable. But with hindsight, it wasn't naive. It was just hadn't been done. It's as simple as that. There was no naivety about it. We thought there should be something in the market that was suitable for us and was meaningfully sustainable, and it wasn't. So my fellow director, Adrian Clark, at the time in Roulette Records, he always likes having a bit of a route around, and he said, I think we might be able to do something about plastics. Let's start there. What can we do about plastics? Because if we can. We were thinking CDs, maybe CD box. Jewel cases, and I don't know, what could we do? Is there something we could do? That's where it started from, and he started to look at bioplastics in the early days. Because again, he was going, well, look at PET, look at bio-attributed plastics potentially at the time, and he just stumbled on a couple of options, plant-based options, and then he came to the board and said. We should investigate this. And so we just started a process of R&D in Roulette. At the time, I was busy working with your old man in Aspen Waite. It was pre-COVID. We were busy building stuff, so I wasn't really involved in it at that time. Of course, once it got into the R&D stages, then there was a nice little crossover into the work I was doing already with Aspen Waite. And so I very early on saw the commercial application of this and thought, hang on a minute. And even to be fair to Adrian, he coined he sort of said, we got a tiger by the tail here. I think this is bigger than we anticipate. And that was it. So I thought, well, it can't live in Roulette because we're a record label.
Yeah.
It'd be an odd pairing to start. Although, of course we can have R&D, but knowing that space of R&D and innovation, how difficult it is to explain when you're doing R&D tax credits, for example, why the innovation is relevant to your market, and you're a record label, and all of a sudden you're a manufacturer. It's like, let's create a new company that can ring fence these ideas and the innovation, and we can take advantage of all of those things. And that's where Evolution Music came from. And of course we called it Evolution because it was an evolution of Roulette Records and subsequently an evolution of UIC. So it was that. And the evolution of
I was going to say technology and the way that things are done. So it fits all round.
And just the evolution in the music industry. Yeah. And so this is all pre-COVID. We started, for the listeners, you won't be able to see this, but for the people that may be watching on the screen, you can see that was one of the first pressings that we ever did. And for those listeners that can't see this, it's three different colours. It's green, white and black. And the reason it's green, white and black is because those are the only variants of the bioplastic compound that we had available to us, and we had to hand mix it.
Well, luckily it looks good.
And when we put it through it looks quite nice. Cool. I'd be lucky to get that effect again. It's like marble. Yeah. It looks really like a splatter vinyl, But when we went over to a great bunch of guys at Diamond Black in Luton, one of the longest running pressing plants in the UK, it's a funny old place because people have been there for years and have been pressing records when no one else was. So it looks like Steptoe's Yard for those people that get that cultural reference, or for those that maybe prefer a more antiquated one, Dickensian courtyard, right? And there's all these pressing machines, which are all worth a substantial amount of money. And then we're just about to put a compound through it that we have no idea if it's going to work, if it's going to stick. So it was the only other time in my life where I felt that anxious was when we were having a baby. Yeah. It was literally the same effect. But it did press, and we thought, okay, well, does it sound the same? And we put it on, and sonically, there was no difference for the PVC. There was a little bit of surface noise, but no more than you'd expect on like a coloured vinyl or a picture disc. So in those early days, and remember, we were doing this for ourselves. It was like, can we do something for Roulette that would be useful? And because I know a lot of people in the music industry, I was speaking to a producer that I know at Abbey Road, a gentleman by the name of Rob Cass, and was a huge advocate for us in the early days. And I explained to him, in fact, I sent him a sample. And the sample that I sent him was, we'd used one of our own pressings, a band called Collateral, who are a kind of new wave of classic rock band. So I sent him this blind test of this splatter vinyl and said, come back to me and let me know what you think of this. And he sort of came back, but he was almost critiquing the album.
Right.
He was like, yeah, it's all right, but it's kind of a bit classic rock, bit, and I was like, no. Sound good. Yeah, it sounds all right, but yeah, there's a bit of surface noise, but you expect that on a splatter record, maybe a bit more than I'd expect on a colour vinyl. I said, okay, now I'm going to tell you something else. There's no plastic in it. It's completely made from plants. How does that affect your... And I think it's the first time in my life of knowing this guy that he was speechless. Wow. And then within about, whatever, it seemed like ages, he went, if this is what I think it is, from what you've just told me, then this is massive. Yeah. And that's when it just landed. And I went, okay, now we've got to sort this out. And then COVID hit, and so we were just going. We were managing to do a bit of R&D in between lockdown and the other side, and then come out the other side of COVID. And as you quite rightly say, that's when it blew up. We turned up at the Making Vinyl event in Offenbach, and the whole, the industry were there. We weren't there to present. I was on a panel about sustainability. So we weren't there to present evolution as such. I was on the panel, and we were talking about, it was really great because there were 4 or 5 people that have been in the music industry a long time. One of them is a gentleman by the name of Chris Ruder, another great guy who we work with called Craig Evans. And somebody at the tail end of it, somebody said to them, if we want to address sustainability in the music industry, what should we do? He said, talk to Marc Carey. And it was just like a pin drop moment. That's what happened at that event. Everybody was like, who are these people? How can we talk to you? What are you doing? It was just like a bomb went off. It was crazy. And off the back of that, we did a project with Music Declares Emergency and Ninja Tunes and Secretly Group at the Independent Music Market, which is only 20 run. And off the back of that, Brian Eno picked up on it and then asked if we do some projects for his company, Earth Percent. They do amazing work in the music industry around, the same as Music Declares Emergency. And that's, so we started to work, we did a first project with Michael Stipe, and then subsequently with Coldplay and, a number of really great artists that we've worked with. So it really was one of those moments. It was a bit like a runaway train last year because we were still in R&D, but everybody wanted what we had. Yeah. And we knew we weren't ready for the market. And that was a difficult one. It was a difficult one to monitor that. So yeah, there you go. That's the whole history, really.
Yeah, today. I think it's like you're almost like growing at a rate that you can't almost like keep up with at the moment. That seems to, from an outsider's point of view, I might be wrong, but that seems almost like your biggest issue.
Totally.
It's a good problem to have. Totally. It's a good problem to have, but it's still a problem nonetheless.
It's in a pre-revenue R&D company. There's expectations, and the music industry moves quite quickly. So we've seen some competition move into the space, but as I said earlier, it's like they work with bio-attributed products. It's not what we do. We're bio-based, fully bio-based. But I did kind of put to coin a phrase, the anchors on last year, and said, look, we had people knocking on our door, but I won't name drop, but big named artists like wanting to do huge runs, and I just had to say to the management team, we can't do that. We're not ready, as much as I'd love to say yes. So they went and they worked with I say competitors. Really the way we should view this is that we're all in the market together. We're collaborators, otherwise we're not going to progress. So we're confident about what we're doing and where we go. And the reason that I do a lot of traveling around, which ironically is another of those problems we've got with trying to lower our carbon footprint, and I have to be in different cities around the world. But that's just because of the breadth of the interest in the product. And because there's nobody else doing it, it's only me and the team that can be there, and we've got a fantastic team around us. And now, of course, including a gentleman by the name of Mr. Paul Waite, who works with us as our financial director, and hopefully he'll be with us as we progress.
Mate, it's exciting. It's exciting to be like on the outskirts of this project that's happening. I've seen obviously where I've been into music my whole life, where I've got a vinyl collection. I understand the gravity, the sort of the situation of the the just how major of an invention you've got like on your hands, and it's not surprising to me at all. I mean, obviously, we talk about people like Michael Stipe from REM, and I mean, I think I saw on your website, you've got people like Robert Smith from The Cure, and I know you've been. You've been out for meetings in Athens, Georgia, and most recently, the Netherlands, and you got, isn't there like a pressing plant opening up in Iceland and stuff like that? Like it's sort of blowing up a bit crazy at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's a great project we're working on on the south coast as well with the team from Jigsaw, reverting back to the team behind Ren, and give them a shout out again. But yeah, generally, it also comes back to what I was saying earlier about being embraced by the industry, the people that really want to make a difference. So there are, it's unfair for me to kind of generalise. Well, I did say I was being facetious earlier. There are people that want to make a difference. There are people that know that the industry needs to change, and there are change makers out there. We're not the only ones, So I feel like there's got to be a point. There's got to be a point where I can have a Lennon-esque quote where somebody says something to me and I says, "Well, I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one." Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
It's got to be a moment like that at some point, because it's true. So it's not all us. It's just that we are the first in this space, and there were a couple you mentioned as well what we're doing next. So I guess the way to consider it, if you're listening to this now, anything that is currently made from a toxic plastic material can be made from a bio-based plastic. So there's no reason for those toxic materials to exist, really. They will, because the amount of plastics that are used in the music industry is minimal compared to the built environment. The amount of cabling and piping and whatever, so it is a bit of a drop in the ocean in some ways. People might have a counter argument and say, well, you can recycle plastic and it can be recycled as many times. Fantastic. Then if that's the case, then tell me why fossil fuel based, oil derived, toxic materials are still created and manufactured in the industries. If you're telling me that everything can be recycled and we've got enough to recycle. So that's the counter argument to the counter argument. It's like, great, brilliant, stop producing
just
then. Let's all just recycle for the next 7 years. And of course that's nonsense, right? It's a fairy tale. So the only way to do it is to come up with these other options. So the other thing we looked at, again, from Roulette's perspective, all right, so we know we're going to fix this plastic problem. We fixed it. Now what can we do about merchandise? So what can we do about T-shirts? What can we do? So we've started on that. So we're just about to launch a whole range of Evo merch, which is completely sustainable, reused, renewables. We work with the agencies that work with the organisations in the countries of manufacture. So creating cooperatives and support mechanisms for the people that work there in those developing worlds. So again, the ethos is completely there. So that's the next thing. That's like a bit of an exclusive for you. That's the next thing we're going to be doing.
Awesome,
Evo merch is coming onto the horizon.
Brilliant. Yeah. And just for people that are listening out there that don't know, obviously, say we've always had a working relationship. AW's always had a working relationship with Marc. I mean, obviously, you used to work for AW yourself, Marc. But we're you mentioned that my old man Paul is now sort of on the board with Evo Music, and Deal Radio and AW Radio are working together. We're working with you now on things like Roulette, in different ways. But and by the looks of things, we're only going to be working together more and more and more. But it's funny, and I was just thinking about it when you were saying earlier about being sort of like the naughty boy in the corner and stuff. I think that's why me and my old man have always worked with you so well, Marc. It's because we're the same. It's like exactly. Like some people just rub us up the wrong way. We don't. Some people just like I don't like dealing with fuddy duddies. Why you said about why you started your own radio station, because you didn't like the limitations and that people were like wanting to change what you wanted to do and stuff. I'm exactly the same. And it's nice dealing with you because it's like similar. We have this. I think the key word I would probably use is that like freedom. You know, it's just like let's treat each other with mutual respect and like common decency without trying to sound contrived. Treat people like you want to be treated, and just giving that level of like freedom. You know, so it's like, okay, yeah, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, but there's that element of freedom to it. You know, and just having like a nice, natural, symbiotic, organic relationship. You know. Without strings attached.
Synergy.
Without strings attached. Yeah, synergy, man. Synergy. I think that would be like a quite a nice place to wrap things up, Marc. Is there anything else just sort of you want to say to any listeners out there or let people know where they can find you before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, you know, keep an eye on what's going on with Evolution Music. You can obviously Google Evolution Music or just go to our website. Very exciting things on the horizon, as you've already mentioned there, with Roulette Records working more closely with AW. I think it's probably relevant and a good point as well to, as soon as you brought it up, to reference Paul Waite, because Paul Waite's one of those characters. You know, you'll know him better than me because you're his son, but he's one of those rare characters you meet in life that actually gives people the freedom to explore their skills and expertise and doesn't create the boundaries around them that you find elsewhere. That's part of Paul's success and this business success is the fact that he's given people the freedom to evolve around him. And I think it's worth a nod and a wink there, because this is a prime example. You know, I was busy in AW working alongside Paul, trying to build a business. We had the lockdown scenario. Of course, no one could have predicted the, Spanish Inquisition, but that strange period of time. But I was able to go to him and felt comfortable and confident enough to go, listen, mate, we were trying to build this pre-COVID. Now COVID's come along. This is happening over here with Evolution and Roulette and everything going on. I really think I probably best if I put my time and effort into this and take you on that journey with me. It doesn't mean that what we've done with AW is not important, but you should take the reins on that and it should reverse back into what you're doing. And of course, anybody else you're dealing with might have gone, well, I've put time and effort, why? But there was none of that. It was like, do you know what, Mr. Carey, you're exactly right. Let's get on with this and let's see what we can do. That, I think, is a rare find. Yeah. So I think it's important that we just give a quick nod and a wink because... Mr. W has done a fantastic job. Sure,
but I will say, obviously, as somebody I've always got my old man's best interests at heart, naturally. And there are some people that I can see maybe have taken advantage of in the past, but I definitely wouldn't see you as one of them, Marc, because I said, you've given to him back by giving him a piece of the pie, if you want to call it that, with Evolution Music. And that's very simple. To me, that's very simple. That's like a nice little simple philosophy in life, which is like, you scratched my back, so I'm going to scratch yours now. I do appreciate what you've done for me in the past, and now I'm gonna repay that. It's no different than you've always got you always you think back to when you were younger or something. You've always got those mates that if you buy them a pint, they'll buy you a pint back, and then you've always got that mate that every time he go out, he asks you to buy him a pint, and you think, wait a minute, mate, have you ever bought me one back? You're like, you absolute git.
I love the fact that we can kind of the analogy comes back to pubs. Yeah. But it's exactly right, mate. So I think what's important is that people.
What's important is if somebody buys you a pint, buy them one back.
Clear. The most important factor that you've learned today is buy someone a pint and buy you one. But no, I was just going to say, obviously, this particular show goes out on both platforms, right? So people that are dedicated to either brand, I think it's important for them to understand how these brands are now combining. And actually, although from an external perspective, they all might have seemed like they were independent brands, but the reality is they all belong 100%. Together. And that's where we're heading. And that's what's really important about the kind of conversations we have. And, we have some great offline conversations about the future. Mate. And it's exciting times. And I think, again, and Drew sort of referenced this earlier, just bringing him back into the throes here, this idea of collaboration, that's how we grow.
Oh, yeah.
If we just keep working in silos, we're just going to have more of the same, right? But we start collaborating, and then the gene pool starts to expand, and the way we
and without sort of like going off on another tangent, you know, at the end of the day, like we're independents, you know, some of these like massive, you know, some of the companies, some radio stations, you know, that have monopolies over the industry a little bit that you know that you would hear on the radio day to day, you know, it can be hard to compete with them. You know, but they are not dominant because necessarily they are always the best. They're the dominant ones because they've got billions and billions and billions of pounds with them. So it makes sense for us to, you know, join together, you know, share resources. You know, one thing I'm always big for in life, which I always try and tell everyone, like, let's play to each other's strengths. If there's something you can do better than me, do it. If there's something I can do better than you, I'll do it. You know, it's very simple, but it makes sense, doesn't it? You know, let's pull together, play to each other's strengths for the greater good of everyone. But
yeah, for sure, man.
Yeah, everyone go follow Evolution Music.
That's a good message,
mate. 100%. Everyone go follow Evolution Music on Facebook. Go look them up on Google. Anywhere you can find them, go follow them. And Roulette Records, Deal Radio, and AW Radio. Give us a listen, give us a follow. Thanks very much, Marc. Lots of love always, mate. I'll speak to you very soon. Cheers, everyone.
It's been a pleasure, mate. All the best.
Cheers,
Thanks,
buddy.
mate.